Well, welcome back to another episode of Leaving a Rich Legacy. I am so excited for my guest today. As you all know, this podcast is just really a love letter to my younger self and talking about some important topics that we don't often discuss in the Black and Brown community. And one of those happened to be therapy. And I know that just along my own journey and tapping into, how I can be become a better version of myself, but then also having conversations with friends and family, it's not always received. So I'm super excited to have our guest with us here today to talk about her journey as a therapist and just a little bit about herself, but then also kind of clarifying and clearing up some misconceptions that we have about therapy and healing. So super excited to have you here, Farah.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yes, yes. So, I know that you and I have connected, but tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, my name is Farah Van. I am the owner and founder of I'm Ready to Talk. That's the website. It's Let's Talk About It Counseling Services. Um, I am, this journey for me it's not new, but it is new, meaning that I am a licensed professional counselor associate in Texas. My business is virtual, and I do see some in person. I am a single mother. I was married, divorced, but I'm a single mother of a 15-year-old son, very active son. So my life is all, when you say juggling, I am always juggling. But 15-year-old son, and yeah, that's pretty much it.
Okay. So can we talk about, and I thought about this and you brought it up. So I'm going to say, how did you come up with your name for your practice?
Because normally, even when I sit down with clients, or even when just me personally, when I'm talking to people, I always say, okay, well, let's talk about it.
Okay.
That's just naturally me. And also, I think it helps people. It's more inviting, instead of just saying, okay, well, what seems to be a problem? What seems to be, okay, well, let's talk about that. And it's very formal. It doesn't seem to be any pressure. You talk about what you want to talk about and how you want to talk about it. So I just figured that was a great name. Let's Talk About It Counseling Services.
Okay. It is. Now, I would say when I first visited your site, I was like, okay, because when you truly think about it, when you're talking with someone that you're usually comfortable with, okay, let's talk about it, right? If it's trying to reconcile something or just clarification, well, let's talk about it. So I do like that. I was like, I gotta ask her. How
Thank
did she
you.
come up
Yes,
with
thank
that?
you.
Okay, so just your own journey and experience, did you ever go through therapy before you became a therapist?
I did. I didn't do individual before, this kind of both. So I went when I was married, my ex-husband and I went to therapy 3 times. And so it was more of a trying to find the best route or best fit for the issues and challenges that we were having at the time. And it was a process, because the first one, he felt like the therapist, and it was a spiritual, we went to a church first, and he felt like I was being more validated in that setting, like they were validating me. Okay, I didn't want that. I want us to both be able to feel like we're getting something out of it. So we went to a third one, and we both at that time felt like that wasn't the best fit for either one of us at all. That was also the spiritual side, the church. So we decided to go outside and find someone else. It was a woman of color. She was not an African American. I do believe that she was of Latin culture, but she was really good. She was really good, and it was a eye-opening experience for both of us at that time, because what I always say was she was very confrontational, not in a bad way. She pretty much told us about ourselves, and how we showed up in the marriage and what we could have done better, what we're doing wrong. And it takes you back a minute, because you can get a little offended, because in your mind you're thinking, okay, but wait a minute, you don't know me like that, but that is a good thing when someone doesn't know you, because there's no biases. They don't know you, they don't know the other person, but they're just telling you what is in front of them. And so for me, that was one of those things where I was like, oh, wow, I needed that because growing up, it wasn't talked about. Therapy wasn't talked about. Even going to therapy wasn't talked about. First of all, you don't go and talk your business to anyone else.
Yes.
Secondly, ain't nothing wrong with you. You're fine. You know, you just got to figure this out, or that's just what married people do, or that's just how. There was a lot of just, that's just how it is without explaining. So moving forward, that was a very great experience for us both. You know, it was very uncomfortable, um, and uncomfortable in the sense of you are learning about yourself. Because you go in thinking that you're right. I'm right, especially when we're talking about couples. You think you're the person, you're right, but you have someone else kind of telling you you're not. So moving on from there, unfortunately, later our marriage didn't work out. But then I did realize that, you know what, this is something that I've always been a big person of where I want to help empower, motivate, inspire people. But I did things along the way, but I just never knew what it was, you know. So I did a lot of research trying to figure out things just for myself and realized that this is a good fit for me because I was doing it anyway. You know, my friends and people always came to me, you know, talking to me about things. And, you know, you're very easy to talk to, you know, you're easy, you listen. And so I thought about it and I prayed on it because one, I don't take that lightly when you're dealing with someone's life and you're giving advice or feedback or motivating or empowering them in any way. I don't take that lightly. So there are, and I did understand and know that there are other things that impacts people's life, trauma. We talked about it, you will talk about it later, anxiety, depression, but you didn't necessarily understand it because it's not talked about. So I wanted to get educated in it, and best way was to go get a degree.
Okay.
And to kind of answer your question, yes, and even in the process, I did begin individual therapy, and yeah, I will honestly say it's the best thing. It was the best thing that I have done because it has helped me um, transition life and understand the changes and how my history, how my relationships have impacted my thinking and the way I do things, and it's also helped me change my mindset.
So you touched on a couple of things I want to address.
Okay.
So I've never been to couples therapy and I've never been married. But you know, one thing that I've learned just through my own therapy and just even me being a life coach is how it can be important for couples to go to couples therapy before they
Yes.
actually get married.
Yes.
So for those individuals who are either, you know, engaged in a relationship or married and they feel that the therapist may be biased or they're not getting what they need for on both sides, what would be the best next steps, right? Because when you feel like they're favoring one individual, I'm assuming, but if you feel like someone's being favored, you kind of lose faith in the process. So what would be your advice for those couples or that individual that may be experiencing it?
Well, one of the things that I will say is that it is okay if you don't feel like the therapist is the best for you, because it is okay to try to see what I look at therapists like jeans and clothes. You know, you have to try it on for the best fit, and it may not be. But you also want to be aware that in couples therapy, even not necessarily with marriage, just couples, the therapist is on the side of the relationship. So it is not necessarily I'm on the side of the male or the female. You are on the side of the relationship. And sometimes that is hard for individuals to see when you want to be justified in your actions and your behaviors and your thoughts. And I am a therapist that I ask a lot of questions. How do you feel? Do you feel like you're being attacked? If so, why? What is the reason? Can you explain to it? And it opens up better dialogue too, because it gives me a better understanding on how you're feeling about this process. It gives me a better understanding on how you feel about maybe me, and give you the opportunity to ask any question. And they may not, because it's new. It may be new. But I always want anyone who goes to any type of couples, premarital, or marriage counseling, the therapist is on the side of the marriage. That is their client. The marriage or the relationship is their client, not necessarily the man and the woman. It's the relationship.
Okay, that's powerful. And I think that will help a lot of people when you think about it, because it is, right? I need you to be on my side.
Yeah. And that happens a lot when couples come in. They want you to know they're talking like, I'm right. It's me, and sometimes couples are very transparent when they come in. We need to work on this. I don't understand this. And when you come in with an open mind and heart and understanding that there are things that we both can work on, it works better. But there's so many things that go into relationships. You're talking about two different people coming with two different backgrounds, two different ways of being raised, two different thought process. You're two individuals trying to work together, and that's difficult.
Speaking on that, so two different individuals, two different backgrounds, and then you mentioned earlier, trauma looks different for everyone. One thing I realized when I was going through my journey, but just, interacting with my friends or strangers, or, maybe even, men that I dated, just trying to learn and understand, like, what are they doing to better themselves? And everyone, I shouldn't say everyone, but most, pretty much associated trauma with like some type of abuse. And they don't realize that it doesn't have to be just some type of abuse. I know for me, one thing I learned very early in therapy was like the impact my parents' divorce had on me. And then I'm like looking at my siblings, I'm like, oh my gosh, like it explains so much. So talk to me just a little bit about trauma and understanding that it's not a box. It doesn't have to be sexual abuse, physical abuse. There's so much more to it.
It is. There's so many forms of trauma that it's really endless, and it also depends on the person. Someone may experience, just use you and your siblings, for example. You and your siblings experience the divorce of your parents. Each one of you experienced that differently. Each one of you received it differently. Each one of you processed it differently. So it's not going to look the same for everyone. It's not going to be coped the same way for everyone. And so, yes, there's different things, but we also need to keep in mind that there's something called intergenerational trauma, which is trauma that's passed down through, you may not have experienced it directly, but it's passed down because our parents, our grandparents experienced it, but it's passed down through genes, how they handle things, how we witness them stress about it or handle this. So trauma is so broad. It really is. And, there's a lot that goes on in the world right now. We see so much on TV. We could be traumatized by that. You can hear something about a really close loved one or friend, and it traumatizes you. So it's not necessarily just abuse. I mean, we could talk forever about all the different types of traumas that affect and impact people. But I think it's important that we are aware, and we're aware, and we have knowledge of the fact that trauma shows up different ways and it impacts people differently.
That intergenerational trauma that you're talking about, did I say that right? Wait a minute. Now I got generational.
It's intergenerational.
Intergenerational. I'm like, wait a minute. And that's so funny because I do that often. I'm like, that is not right. Okay, so intergenerational trauma, I think that is important to understand too. As I think about my parents and how they were raised, and some of the things that I blamed them for and was still holding on to as an adult. So now I have to go back and unpack, okay, their capacity, how they were raised, my
Right.
grandparents' capacity, and
Right.
how it just basically trickled down to me. And then I now have a decision. Now I'm more aware and I have the knowledge. How do I break some of that, for the next generation?
Right. And the important part of that is that it's very difficult when someone becomes aware of it, because the first thing we have to realize is that, to your point, our grandparents and parents did the best that they knew how to do with what they had, right? Because sometimes we hold on to pain and anger that we don't really understand. So once we start understanding, some people are not always comfortable with going to the past and breaking things down. I am a big component of genograms, which is, you're looking at your family, you do a genogram and looking at everybody and see how the relationships are. Was there any type of abuse, alcoholism, mental health, all of that? Because when you do that, you get a bigger picture of where you come from, because it's not just you. We automatically feel like it's just our two parents. No, sometimes stuff skips a generation.
Wow.
Often it skips a generation, and it impacts you. So it is big on understanding and knowing where your family dealt with, any traumas there, um, any mental health issues there, any illnesses, anything. So you know what could possibly be impacting you as well. And if you have children and their children, um, being I always say it's very hard, because sometimes people have difficulty accepting things that were in the past because they feel like that has nothing to do with me. It does. It really does. And so if you know in what happened, you know what to do moving forward, or how to handle things moving forward.
Yeah. I think that's good to the thought of it has nothing to do with me,
Mm-mm.
because it probably has a lot to do with you, depending on how you were raised. You said it could skip a generation, and you could be just experiencing some very similar experiences from the prior generations,
Absolutely.
grandparents, and not even realize it.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
And I think some of that is too, right? Like when I think about my grandparents, I remember all the great things, but there's so many things that I don't recall, right? Because I was young, I may have not been born, and there's so many experiences that my parents may have experienced or gone through, and it was either kept away from us or we were not directly impacted at the time, and then later it can come around.
It is. And in some of the older generations, I know that was really big for some of my grandparents, is that they didn't talk about things. You just didn't talk about it. And so if they passed on, it's lost and you don't know. So you're trying to, understand and put pieces together of what you heard, what you witnessed, what you experienced, to try to better understand you. And that happens a lot. I get a lot of clients that are coming in life transitions, and just trying to figure out who they are
Mm,
later in life. Who am I? And that is a process. For me, I always tell my clients, therapy is a journey. It's your journey. It's not going to be a straight path. It can be hilly, and I talk about it on my website that my journey is, I've had winding roads, sometimes falling rocks. It's just your journey, and embrace it, because you're learning who you are. Because oftentimes we're told who we are. And then it's not until later in life we try to figure out, I don't like that. I don't know
yeah.
who I am.
Ooh, that is so good.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. One thing I love, even on this podcast, but just when I meet people and I'm like, tell me a little bit about yourself, or I ask who they are, and they don't start with everything that society has told them they're supposed to be. Because we
Mhm.
get lost. And you're right, even when it comes to, it could be generations, right? There's so many things that we're told we're supposed to do.
Mhm.
It comes to work, right? You're not supposed to leave that good paying job, just supposed to stay
Yep,
there
yep,
and retire,
yep,
and
yep.
you're miserable.
Yeah,
But it's
yeah.
things that we're told that we're supposed to be and we're supposed to do, and you do that until until you die. And I
And
think we're changing that.
yeah, and to your point, I didn't mention this, but this is a second career for me. And it was something, this was a definitely step out on faith and follow what I felt like really was my purpose, because helping people is big for me. Giving them opportunities to figure out who they are, develop better communication skills, coping skills, things that I wasn't always afforded until I learned how to do that or took the initiative to go learn it myself. Um, and that takes courage in anybody's life, because that means that you're stepping out, what we were talking about, and finding out being something different than what your family wanted you to be, what your friends thought you should be or who you are. That's huge for a lot of people, and it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, you're right about it being uncomfortable, and the fact that this is your sex. So you stepped out on faith,
I did.
and
I did.
I'm sure a lot of people look at you, and they may not even say it, but it inspired them, and they wish they had the courage to do it because we're afraid.
I've received that, and I'll be honest, I haven't always received that as I don't even know to say if it's a good thing. I've had a hard time knowing how to receive that, because it wasn't anything that I did for someone else to see or acknowledge or praise. It was something for me. So when I get that, I always kind of be like, oh, okay. I never really thought about it in a sense of that. And a moment of transparency. I've worked with my own therapist on learning how to celebrate me,
Mm,
because I do things and okay, I've done that. Okay, good, because I want to do this, but I've never taken the time to stop and celebrate the small things that I've accomplished, the small things that I've done. I let other people may do that or say it, but I didn't do it for myself. So that for the last probably year and a half, that has been something that I have worked really hard on, is learning how to celebrate me, because it is big. And I pass that on to my clients. Learn how to celebrate you. Learn how to be okay with who you are.
so one thing, the celebrating is huge, right? And it's crazy because people will acknowledge you and recognize you all day, and then you're like, oh, I didn't take a moment to celebrate that.
At
And
all.
five different things have happened, and you
Yes.
just missed all these celebrations. One thing that my therapist recommended was, and this was a prior therapist, I set calendars, or a calendar every day, either on my phone or an alarm. And at noon, I would stop and just celebrate something about myself in that
Oh, that's
moment.
good. That's
And
good.
it was like, it became a habit. Now it's just more natural, right? It's not every
Hmm.
day, but I
Hmm.
do things to celebrate myself. And I do feel like sometimes it's hard and I'm just going to speak specifically about Black women or
Yeah.
women of
Oh,
color.
yeah.
We do so much, and there's such this high expectation that it's almost as if we don't think we're deserving of the celebration because we're supposed to do it, right? This is
Right.
what you're supposed to do. And I encourage celebrate yourself all the time. And
I am, but something that you said, yes, we get lost in all the things we have to do, but I always say that as women, we get lost in other people and things. We lose ourselves in other people and things. We lose ourselves in our careers. We lose ourselves as girlfriends and wives. We lose ourselves as mothers. We lose ourselves as friends. We lose ourselves in other things. And then we later step back and try to figure out what happened to me. I don't even know who I am. So that goes into celebrating, because if we don't celebrate ourselves, we lose ourselves.
and just want your thoughts. Do you think some of that comes from the intergenerational habits or behaviors? Because when I think about that, it's as if, there are certain things that girls are raised at a young age that you should do, and you just carry it forward. So it's like I'm supposed to be doing that. And sometimes I know I feel like I'm not doing enough
Yeah,
when my calendar is not 8 a.m. to 12 p.m., 12 a.m. Or
right.
I've spent my entire day and I'm like, I didn't do enough. I need 36 hours, not 24. So when you're working with some of your clients that are women, like, can you talk a little bit about that? Just the pressure that we receive at a young age?
We do. And so when you say at a young age, that lets me know that that is what we were taught indirectly. Because I do a lot of my women, and I do it with my men clients as well. I will challenge them to and ask them, what were you taught about being a woman, a mother, or a wife? What were you taught? And I want to be clear when I say that, not necessarily taught by someone sitting down telling you, because we rarely got that. Is what you were taught by what you witnessed, what you saw. And it may not have been from a mother, it could be from an aunt or any other women in the community that were around you. So it's not necessarily what, we were told, is what we witnessed and saw, that that's what we're supposed to do. And the question that we have to ask ourselves is, do we have to be like the women that came before us? And do we even want to be like them? There are
Didn't
some
know who they
great
were.
qualities. Yeah, they have some great qualities. I always say they were cut from a different cloth. But do I want to be a part of that cloth, or do I want my own cloth?
Yes.
Do I want to show up in my own cloth? It's a difference. Because if you would ask them, did they want to do those things or did they have to? That's the difference. Are we afforded to do something different? Sometimes we are, but we choose their way because that's all we knew. And there's also this stigma that, Black women are so strong. Yeah, but do we want to be? Do we want to be? Or do we have to be? And if we have to be, the question is, why do we feel like we have to be? So there's so many things, that we have to ask ourselves and then be comfortable with being honest with ourselves. Because I always say and tell a lot of my clients, the hardest thing is being vulnerable with yourself, because vulnerability is very uncomfortable. Being vulnerable with someone else, but when you're being vulnerable with yourself, that means you're being honest with yourself and saying, I don't want to do this. I don't want to be this strong. I am tired. I can't do this right now. That's being vulnerable with yourself and being okay with feeling that way. It's nothing wrong with that. It is okay if you feel like I got to keep going. If not, I'm afraid to break. What happens if you break? What happens if you fall apart? We don't know because we don't allow it. So there's so many things that we witnessed growing up that we felt like we had to be, but then we don't allow others to be able to take care of us because we feel like we don't need it.
Yeah. I stopped using strong a couple years ago. I choose not to use it to define myself or my friends or women around me. I want them to know you don't have to be strong. I don't want you to be strong. So I try to find other words to recognize them, because to your point, it's like once we get to the point where we do break, not good. It's not good at all.
No, and everybody around you don't know what to do. They're like, we don't know what to do. Yeah.
Right. Because you've been the person that's carrying everybody and being there. So now they don't know how to respond to you. And you said something that you talked about, like how you got to become a therapist and you realizing it was your passion. And I had something similar where I was like, how do I shift all of this that I'm giving to others and I'm doing where I can set boundaries as well? Because I'm pouring so much that I no longer have anything to give to myself. So do you feel like as a therapist, it has helped you with boundaries just in general in your life?
Um, I believe it has. Um, I believe even with becoming a therapist, getting educated and having my own, it helped me understand boundaries more.
Okay.
And it helped me understand that some of the people in my life that I felt like I couldn't set boundaries with, I needed to set the boundaries with. And I'm speaking about family, which is the hardest group of people to set boundaries because it's your family. And for me, it wasn't the boundaries when it comes to like my clients and doing that wasn't difficult for me. It was being available and too accessible to everyone else when I didn't have it for myself. Because and I wasn't being poured into. I use this with my clients, I use it with myself. A lot of people use the phrase, people don't pour into you, and they don't pour into you. I use things because people understand money real good. Because if your money not right, you just can't think. So I always say that what happens when your bank account is in the red? You don't have no money. It's empty. You can't you can't spend any money, you can't go anywhere, there's nothing you can do. So what happens when you invest into your bank account? And that's people investing into you, pouring into you instead of you giving from an account that has insufficient funds. So you're constantly giving on insufficient funds and you're drained. You're just going deeper into the red, but nothing, you've not given yourself anything to get the bank account back up. Other people have it, because when you become too accessible to people, of course they're going to take it. Absolutely. Why wouldn't they? So I had to start looking and thinking about that. And it came to a point where I had to be comfortable of letting people go out of my life. And when I start letting people go, it's amazing how things just turned around. I found more peace. I had more time mentally and emotionally. So boundaries didn't necessarily come with therapy. It came with understanding the capacity that I no longer have to give to clients or to my practice or to trying to help other people because it's being taken from other people and things.
Okay. That's powerful, the part about letting people go, because I feel like it's hard to identify that. And I know therapy for myself has given me a better understanding of the boundaries that I need with family and friends and work. I'm going to talk about that because you also talk about work-life balance.
Yeah.
Work. And I have found a place of peace where I'm okay with being alone with just Jessica. And I'll be honest, my therapist is like, hey, we might need to watch this though, because you're telling me you're not doing anything. But I've gotten to a point where I am okay with being alone with Jessica. And in the past, I was out so much with friends that it's not to say that I had a fear of being alone, but I was doing, somebody would ask me to do something. I was like, yeah, I'll do it. But did I want to do it?
Right.
And did it benefit me?
Right.
And now I'm okay if I spend weekends alone with Jessica. With Jessica. That's okay.
Yeah. And congratulations on that, because that's huge. There are so many people who don't like or don't know how just to sit with themselves, and it's uncomfortable for them.
Yeah.
Good for you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. And you use my favorite word, capacity. That is my word. I don't have capacity for that, but no, boundaries definitely. It's a challenge, and I know I would just, when my family would call, hey, I don't have capacity for that right now. Can you call? Even timing? I found timing was important. If you call me at the start of my day before I log into work and it's bad news, is it something that absolutely needs to be shared right now? Right? If it's a death, or even that, is it something that you know will impact me, or is it better for a conversation in the evening? And if I had to do that, where I still got to work.
Yeah,
If it's something that's not urgent, can you be mindful of the timing of sharing? And that's
yeah.
one thing that me and my best friend do, and I some others have done it. Is we'll ask like, what's your capacity like right now?
That's good.
And if they don't have the capacity, then we wait, or maybe it's something that just doesn't need to be shared.
That's good. That's good that you all are asking that. And I always say be mindful of when you set the boundaries with people and they dismiss it or disrespect it, that just take note.
But
Just take note.
what if it's family? Now, I've had conversations with parents have stopped talking to children because they implement boundaries.
Parents are by far the hardest to set boundaries with because um, one, they feel like I'm your parent. Why do you need boundaries? There's no boundaries for us.
Mhm.
Two, sometimes people feel obligated because they are your parent and they feel guilty if we said it. But there still has to be boundaries because you have your life. You know, you have your own life, you have things going on. You understand the capacity that you have to be able to endure or receive things. And the part that's always difficult first is setting boundaries with parents and people, but is also enforcing your consequence. And when people hear consequence, it just kind of makes them be like, oh, okay, how do you do that? And it looks different for everyone. So if you have to set a boundary, and we'll use something very simple, um, like you said about the time, I've asked you not to call me at a certain time unless it is absolutely urgent. But you keep doing it anyway just to talk about whatever, and it's not urgent. That means that you dismiss and you disrespected my boundary that I've set for myself. So at this point, the consequence is you don't have to say it, but the consequence is I will no longer answer your phone calls during a certain time frame. I will no longer respond to your texts during the time that I have set, and I will respond to that. You may deal with what we call a temper tantrum, and they're upset because they're used to pushing your boundaries and you're just going ahead with it. But it happens. I've had to do that with a parent, and it's hard. But at the same time, I had to set boundaries. And you're right, the relationship wasn't the same for a little while. But it once they understand, it got better. It's more so how we receive it because you have to be firm on your boundary. And then when you loosen it or relax it, you open it right back up.
So you have transitioned from a prior career, which was in corporate America.
Mhm.
So I know you understand work-life balance and boundaries.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
how you know why how can therapy be beneficial to helping an individual with work-life balance?
Um, it's very beneficial because I think that first you have to identify what area of your life do you feel is out of balance? Is it work? Is it life? And how do you identify balance in your life anyway? Because that looks different for everyone. So if it's work that's out of balance, okay, then we can talk about that and figure out what would it take or what do you need for it to become balanced? Is that possible? What strategies or coping mechanisms or skills or tools can we implement to make it balanced? Then you got to look at your life. Is it truly out of balance, or are you just feeling that it's out of balance because it's not being managed?
Mm.
And work is overtaking life. or life has overtaken work. So when you're talking about work-life balance, I always ask people, well, which part is out of balance? And sometimes people are like, I don't know. Where do you feel most out of balance? And that takes some time. And it's really, to your point, there are lack of boundaries being set somewhere. And it's usually time boundaries at work, because there's no time boundaries. You start and you stop. But then even if you're off, are you allowing work to continue to penetrate your personal life? Why? Is there a reason? What can we do different? Being able to identify things at work and at home that's urgent, that can wait, or that can be delegated. Delegation is a hard one for a lot of people. Delegation is a hard one. So our life is out of balance, but when you start trying to figure out where is it out of balance and what does balance look like for you, what does it mean to you, then you can start peeling back things. But sometimes people don't even know what that means. They just know they feel off. They feel overwhelmed. They feel stressed.
And sometimes, right, I'm thinking back, if I really look at it, my dad worked 2 jobs. So it's almost makes you question, like, am I complaining or do I need to suck it up because this is the way life is supposed to be? You're supposed to be overwhelmed, and work is supposed to, and this is even me talking with people that I know in my company, and like, it's supposed to be this way. And it's, and I'm like, no, work is not supposed to be stressful.
And the question that I would have is, who told you it was supposed to be that way? And when you ask questions, people kind of sit back and was like, well, I don't know. Okay, well, let's process that. Where did that come from? Yeah. And then that goes back to, as well, is that we don't like to always say, well, my parents did it, because it's almost like if they did it, I'm supposed to be able to do it.
Right.
But I don't want to. Things change. Times change.
And if they knew they had other options, right, or the courage to change things, would they want to do that, right? It is a lot. And I can say I'm a younger leader sometimes, right? So when you're working with folks who are a little bit older, but even the thought of leaving for some people is like, they would never. So I always love to see when people leave whatever company they're with or industry, profession, and they make that decision to choose themselves and do something else, even if it's their 50s and 60s. Like, yes. I love it, because there's life outside of and after whatever it was they were doing.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I like that when you said that they chose themselves. And that's hard. Choosing ourselves is sometimes hard.
But I see therapy that way too. Like, it's an opportunity to choose to be a better version of yourself. And I think people think that's so cliche, but I was talking to someone and they had experienced a lot of trauma with the death in the family of a sibling. And they're like, there's nothing wrong with me. And I'm like, there doesn't have to be necessarily something wrong with you to go to therapy. It's not that. It is an opportunity to like choose yourself, whatever that looks like, because there's so many benefits of therapy.
Yeah. And sometimes you need a different perspective or a different listening ear outside of family and friends. Because although friends try to show up unbiased, sometimes they do. And family, they want the best for you, so they think they're telling you, but sometimes you need to just be heard, seen, and valued. And you may not always get that from family and friends.
And that can be hard to accept.
It can be. It can be. it's not a negative thing on family and friends. It's just that you may not get that. And sometimes you may not feel safe saying everything you want to say. Um, everything you want to say. So it's, therapy's always good because I call it the no judgment zone, no heat, no, it's you say and be who you are, and it's fine. Sometimes when you're saying things, some people may take offense to it or take it personal, and it's not personal. It's just how you feel. And therapy is good for that. And just to process and dissect your thoughts and feelings and just work it out. And sometimes it's just to talk.
And let's talk about it.
Yeah.
But what I got from what you're saying is too, you're allowing them a space where they can say everything without being judged or ashamed.
Yep.
Because if they come and tell me, right, and it's something that they're ashamed of, then they may leave that out, which that might be a very important piece of the story or conversation. But with you, they can be open and share that with you without feeling ashamed or truly themselves. And that changes the whole conversation or advice if they're looking for that.
It does. And I'm also looking at them and I'm listening. I am actively listening for what you're not saying, but what you're feeling. Because often you're coming in with an agenda, but you're nervous about talking about that. And I can see that. So I'm going to let you talk about what you're talking about, but then I may switch it and ask a question that brings that out. And so it gives you the comfortableness to, okay, well, since you said something, you don't want to just come straight out and say it, because to your point, some people are very ashamed and embarrassed and about certain things, and it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. This is what we're here to talk about. And I'm real big on telling my clients, don't apologize for who you are. That's who you are. That may not be who you want to be, and that's fine. But right now, this is who you are. We'll talk about who you want to become, and we'll work to get there.
So when we were talking about work and work-life balance, and I think this can be all areas of life, but stress, and we kind of mentioned anxiety a little bit earlier, is real.
It is real.
And I feel like just my own personal experiences, no one taught me how to manage it or identify it. So it wasn't until a few years ago so I had a panic attack. Never experienced that.
Okay.
I'm on the road in Louisiana, working hurricanes, my job at the time. I'm in a hotel room by myself. And after that happened, I started being more aware of how I was feeling.
Good.
And that's how I realized I had been experiencing anxiety and just not knowing. And what was probably kind of triggers. And then I'm bringing it up in therapy, but it wasn't until that happened and I absolutely could not control the situation in the moment. Now I'm identifying that, whoa, like I've probably been experiencing anxiety for a while and not even know it and think I'm supposed to. But then talking to family and friends, I don't want to say I felt judged, but I definitely felt misunderstood, because it was like, read this book and I've experienced it and this book helped me. So I read the book and it didn't get better. And then I did kind of feel ashamed. And, my doctor's like, well, we can get you some medication. And it took me like 6 or 7 months before I would even take the medication. And that's when the prescription was already put in, the order was in. I just refused to take it. And I shared with you, I stopped taking it a couple months ago, and I got some new things that happened in my life, and I felt the impact of not having that. And it's just more awareness that I want to give people, because I feel like what I experienced, right? I'm sure my family and friends meant well, but
Right.
it's as if like there's something wrong with taking it. So can you just kind of share about, let's start with anxiety. I want to ask too many questions, but just anxiety in general and the lack of knowledge and awareness and how it really, really affects us.
So there are several different types of anxiety disorders. And it just shows up different for different people. You know, some just may have overall general anxiety, just different thing. Some can be social anxiety. Some can be phobias. So it's one of the things that I think is important isn't to identify when you start feeling anxiety, but we have to also understand what is anxiety. Anxiety is usually the anticipation of a future threat. So somehow you become fearful of something you feel is about to, that you're going to be in danger or that is going to be threatening to you, which causes the rapid breathing, increased heart rate, sometimes excessive worrying that you may get. Um, so, or you may have difficulty concentrating because you're always on edge of that. So it is important to be able to identify what causes that. Where are you? What's happening at that time when you start feeling that? Because if you're constantly feeling it during certain situations, then you're able to say and go get help and say, I feel it when this happens. Um, I don't know if it was for you, if it was driving or was it just the fact of the job you're having to go into, because I think you said you was working CAT.
Mhm.
You know, what were you able to identify? It was it that, or was it just several different things? And it could be, but it is important for people to be aware that it is real. It can happen. Just take note and be mindful of what is causing this. Some people can't take when it's a big crowds, or so when that happens, your anxiety level goes up. What does that mean? I get real nervous. I can get clammy. I can get sweaty. My breathing starts. I'm just starting thinking that everybody's looking at me, or so. All these things happen. That's an indication that mm, you are anticipating some sort of future threat or you're fearful of something.
And I think,
Um,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna
No,
say
go
when you
ahead.
say fearful, and some people, I'm speaking for myself, not some people. I think with me, it was, you know, we shouldn't have this spirit of fear, right?
Mm,
So you have to, why are you afraid? You know? And I think that I just ignored the feelings and the symptoms. And it just finally was a breaking point, right? That helped me. That one instance is like, okay, something's, and then now I can unpack what led up to that or other things that were going on. Cause I can't say that specifically was, directly towards the anxiety, but I was more aware of myself and
yeah.
my feelings and the things that I had been ignoring for a while. So I apologize for cutting you off.
No, 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 no. That's fine because I wanted to touch on that too. Because the fear is just the emotional response to like a threat or a received or real, perceived or real threat or something going on. So fear is the emotional response to which is real or what you perceive to be happening, and that is okay because you have to be able to acknowledge it in order to understand this is what I'm feeling. I'm feeling fear because whatever I feel threatened or I feel unsure, which is causing my anxiety. And that is a process too that, in therapy you can learn is being able to identify what you are feeling to explain the behavior or body sensation that may be going on.
Well, and you can help with coping mechanisms and
Absolutely. And you develop those, yeah. The first thing is you want to be able to identify and understand that this is what you're feeling. And there are coping mechanisms and strategies that you can do to help reduce the anxiety first, because that's what we want to do is reduce that. because to your point, you said you had a panic attack. You know, you want to be able to learn how to reduce those. And then we can work on strategies and skills and all those things.
And I love that you said it's okay.
Mhm.
'Cause sometimes it feels like it's not okay. Not okay to feel that way, to have those emotions, but then also it's not okay to even share with someone what you're experiencing. Because I think sometimes society it puts this pressure that like life is life and we're supposed
Yeah.
to be going through it without complaining. Like, we're all going through the same thing. We are not all going through the same thing. Our journeys look completely different.
Completely. Yeah. And that is, you know, adulting and life and lifing is real big terms right now. And it is true. Life does life because it's been happening to me, but everybody doesn't know how to deal with life the same way. And to your point, life doesn't happen the same way for everyone. And that's another thing when we talk about therapy, it helps you to be able to um, know how to deal with life experiences, life transitions, because that's big. You know, things happen in life, which causes you to pivot sometimes quickly and don't know how to handle that mentally or emotionally at all. And therapy can help you with that.
When you say life transitions, what are some things you're referring to? Because I think sometimes we could perceive life transitions to be these huge, big events, right? But it doesn't
Mhm.
necessarily have to be.
Life transitions, such as sometimes we're looking at young adults going into adulthood. That's a transition. They don't know how to do that sometimes. Transition in maybe becoming when you're married and then you become single. You don't have to have children, but that's a life transition. Life transition with jobs. You know, I decided to transition to a different job in that case, living situation. That's a different, you know, things happen which impact your living situation. Friendships, you know, that's also friendship and relationships. Grief, the loss of, and grief isn't just losing a loved one or a friend, but the loss of a job, loss of friendships, loss of a pet, loss of marriage. There's so many things that people lose that it transitions your life. It's trend when you say that it's something that either upsets or turns around your life that we have a difficult time processing of what to do next. So it's endless transitions that can happen.
Right. Thank you for clarifying that.
You're
Um,
welcome.
just because I think with therapy, there's so many things that again, I'm speaking for myself and people who are in close proximity of me when we're having conversations. There's this perception, a big event, maybe just divorce, right? But it could be a loss of a friendship or the
Mhm,
transition of, you said, a young adult into adulthood and getting
mhm.
out of college and realizing bills are real. But there's so many
Yeah,
things that therapy can just help you through. And I just want to clarify so that they know like there's just major benefits. So the last few years we've had, I think everyone has experienced some type of transition with the work from home, with being shut down, and anxiety and depression is on the rise.
yes.
Now in the Black and Brown community, we don't talk about it much. I think
Mhm.
there's been an increase. You listen to like social media, and we see more therapists that look like us that are having these conversations. But
Yes.
just your thoughts on the lack of conversation in our community.
Um, I think the lack of conversation just really stems from the stigma around mental illness and health in our community. And just how your own personal experiences or your lack of education and knowledge forms your thought process around depression, anxiety, mental health, all of that. Now, the last 3 years of everything that's happened out in the world, it's become more prevalent for everyone to talk about it, it's better, but there's still some work to do when we do that. And sometimes it is a cultural thing, because growing up, and when I say it's cultural things and lack of education, because growing up, I don't know about you, but I used to hear a lot, that person is crazy, or they not right in the head. And so when you hear those things, that gives a negative connotation to mental health and illness, that there's just something wrong with them. And it could be, they just may not have known how to deal with something emotionally or mentally. They've been impacted by it. And so I think it's a really, really important to be able to identify, which means that we're addressing the symptoms of mental illness. Is it okay or I don't want to say okay, but are you recognizing that depression or anxiety is a normal part of your life? If that is, what do you do with that? Do they think that their depression or anxiety is surrounded by physical health, environmental, your career, your job, there's so many things that may be causing the issue, but we have to be able to identify it. Some of the other things are the reason why we don't talk about it, because they look at it sometimes as spiritual weaknesses, or just personal weaknesses, or that's just their character. They're not strong enough. So those are the things that it's not talked about, because it's frowned upon, because it's looked at as weaknesses, or you just need to go to the church and pray about it. You can just pray about it. Well, yeah, you can pray and still get therapy. I mean, it still all works together. But in our communities, sometimes it's not talked about because it's viewed as weakness. And I think it's some questions too of, can mental illness develop the same way as physical health issues? Yeah, it can, or it may not. It just depends. Those are one of those things of being educated, and how do you feel about it? And also not fully understanding, if some of these mental illnesses go untreated, what are the consequences of that? I don't think we want to talk about that either, because there's so many things that go into that when I say go untreated, because we're also looking at systematic healthcare, that may not be for us. So it can really go deep. I don't want to go too deep, but the more we start talking about it, I'm thinking like there's so many things that go into that, why they don't feel comfortable. There is a trust in healthcare in the Black and Brown communities. Mm-hmm. So we're not only are we not going to talk about it, but I don't trust going getting help, because there's so much untrust in these communities with healthcare. So where do I go? And then some feel like there's a lack of representation in therapy, because I want to talk to someone that looks like me. I want to talk to someone who can understand my experience, my background. And I will say that there's an increase of Black and Brown therapists, which I'm very proud to say there's increase. Now, it may be the availability, because they are filling up quick, which is good. That's a good thing. But that, and historically, that has been it, because there's been a lack of representation for us and the therapy and mental health world. So, it's just, we just have to keep working, and we have to keep talking, and making it okay to say I am not okay. And I think it just takes time, and just being more open to communication, and, podcasts such as this.
And that is one reason I wanted you and I to connect, because I know people are trying to find that right fit.
Yes.
And you talked about the genes, and then not only the right fit, but sometimes the conversations that I want to have, I need that comfort of someone who looks like me.
Yeah.
And and that's no offense to any other therapist, but there is some comfort there, because there already is this distrust. I don't want to tell you all my business so you can go tell someone else.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you are more focused about your license than, but there is just that's the response. Like, she's, they're gonna tell, just have the the courage and not only courage, but knowing that you are deserving of what's on the other side of healing is what I
Yes.
tell people. Whatever that fear is, there's a fear, right? And it either it's something that's happened to you or it could be from our parents. Because I'm sure,
Mhm.
I told my parents 10 years ago I was going to therapy, they'd be like, what? But
Yep.
now I can have the conversation. My dad listens to this podcast and he's
Oh,
like,
great.
it's so funny because the last time I was home, he was like, I was like, yeah, I'm getting some views. He was like, keep going. That meant a
Yes.
lot.
Yes,
That meant a lot.
absolutely.
So we think that, what we've heard from others that we value their opinions, but they don't know what they don't know as well. So they're
No.
speaking from no experience. This is why I had to have you because I know that the presence of seeing more Black and brown therapists is really increasing, our
Mhm.
community to want to go because we just assume all the negatives, and we don't
We
know.
do. We do. And, and I also think that the more we talk about it, it helps and encourages people to know that you're not alone. You're not alone. Um, there are so many people struggling and going through different things just like you. And you're just not alone. And it's okay the more we talk about it.
Regardless of the packaging, right? We look at people, especially social
Yeah.
media. I'm like, oh my gosh,
Oh,
they got it together. I want to
that
be
is,
like them.
listen, social media can definitely create an illusion. And you're right. That was a good way of saying it, regardless of the packaging. Understand it. And we see it more and more and more when you're seeing, the suicide rates, the people that are on social media talking about their depression. It does give them an open platform to be open and talk about it and understand. I'm very happy to see that more people are talking about it and okay. Um, but it's gotten so much better because there is more representation for us out there, and it has been I know there's been an increase since the pandemic. There's so much that's been going on, and the pandemic almost forced people to realize I got to do something. I can't. This impacts me personally, professionally, everywhere. And so, although the pandemic was very horrible on so many levels, it was very beneficial and helpful on others.
And I think, and I was going to talk about this when we mentioned work-life balance, but it also made organizations more aware of how
Yes.
important. I think my company, we always had like our EAP resources. So we had resources, but the resources we have now and the things that we're doing and just listening to clients or just other friends when they talk about the things like some companies are offering life coaches, they
Hmm.
have the therapist, right? So there's a program to connect you with the therapist, and then other strategies to help people to kind of cope with stress. So that is a plus. That
It
is
is
a
a
plus.
plus. And I think because the pandemic and other things in the world, it didn't just impact a certain population, it impacted every single one globally. And that made a difference.
So I've only done individual coaching, excuse me,
Okay.
therapy,
Okay.
but you offer group coaching as well.
I do. Um, Group, well, it's like support group, but I do, when we talk about that, I do always want to touch on some of the differences between because there's different things you can do. Support group, you can do group coaching, and then you can do group therapy.
Okay.
And so when we talk about group therapy, I just want to touch on that a difference because sometimes people get it confused. That is definitely when you do group therapy is actually therapy. And that is a therapist who is in there, they're helping manage illnesses and diagnosis, and they usually work with, sometimes they work with clients long term and they focus on like maybe past and present issues. And They're in a group where they all have similar issues, where they may be dealing with things from past trauma, dealing with extreme stress, or having difficulty managing their anxiety or depression. And usually that you do have to be licensed in the state that you practice therapy.
Okay.
Group coaching or support group, you do not have to be licensed in that state. So like I will be soon offering support groups virtually and in person. And so that way that help is across the country. You don't have to be licensed in that state. And that is really great. You know, group coaching and group support therapy, I mean, not therapy, support groups are really good because that also helps people with clarity for their goals. They can also identify obstacles and create action plans. But not only that, it gives you the opportunity to have some camaraderie with other people. And you get different perspectives. You also get to see that I'm not alone. We can all work together and give feedback, give encouragement, give motivation. It helps build confidence. And it's almost like the coach, which the coach or even the therapist is there facilitating because you're creating action plans for your life. And it's more goal oriented when you do support groups, and we're not digging so deep into past, things, and it deals with the present into the future. So I really do like that because it takes you where you are now, and the goal is to move you into the future. And you have other people in there to support you, and it just creates such a great support group.
So I haven't experienced it, but I wanted to make sure I touched on that.
Okay.
Because I figured that if someone was, just wasn't sure about the individual piece, group, the support groups, group therapy, coaching, whatever, may be beneficial. So thank you for sharing that. That's I was like,
thank you for asking about that because some people don't know that's available.
Yes. When I saw it, and I have to say, just as I've done my own research with for therapists locally, I have not seen that, so I was like, I have to ask because that's good.
Yeah. I think it's good because it opens it up, and again, what we keep talking about, you're not alone. And sometimes people just think that they go through things by themselves. No, they don't. So the group opens that up.
Well, Farah, we have thank you again. This
You're
has
welcome.
been awesome. Is there anything else that we probably didn't touch on or that you wanted to share?
No, I think we touched on a lot. I just want to thank you for having me on and even opening up to have this conversation, because although it is, being talked about more, I think we can talk about it even more to let people know that it is okay. And I appreciate you even asking about different about when you're talking about anxiety, because sometimes I don't think that people understand that it is common, it can happen, but there are ways to manage it. And I appreciate you asking that question. And you touched a little bit on you and the medication. I did want to say something about that, is that I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I want people to understand that sometimes medication to manage any type of anxiety, depression, or any other thing is frowned upon or looked as negative, but understand that it comes in different dosages. It may just take a little bit to help you manage it and move forward. It doesn't always have to mean that you're on a high dosage. It's just understand everyone is different and their needs are different. And you do work with, although therapists, we do not prescribe medication. We don't do the diagnosis. We would refer out to that. We will refer you to either a psychiatrist, an MD, or someone that can prescribe you that. But we would definitely collaborate with your other medical provider for treatment. So I did want to point that out.
Yeah. I want these conversations. One, it goes back to the perfect packaging, right? Mm-hmm. I want to be transparent. So, anyone who is inspired by these podcasts or conversations know that we may not be going down the same path in our journey, but sometimes they cross, right? Well, some of the experiences that we have And I want to be as open as possible. So it was so important for me to touch on some of those things with you because I want to encourage somebody to reach out to you or a therapist because we have so many opportunities just to live at our full potential and we don't realize certain things that we can talk about can help us.
Yes, 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 yes. And I appreciate you being very open and honest about your journey. That means a lot.
Thank you. Therapy helped me get here. So that's why I'm a huge advocate. But if there is someone who would like to connect with you or reach out, how can they find you?
They can go to my website. It's I'm ready to talk, the number two. So it's I am ready number two talk.com. And you can reach out to me. My contact information's on there. You can even book a consultation with that. And I will be more than happy to talk with you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again, Farah. I appreciate the conversation and I look forward to us connecting in the future.
Yes. Thank you again for having me. This is so great.
All right. Have a good day.
Bye.